and let's bring him in live for a visit with us again on a Wednesday morning, and that's Dr. Joe Congini, Sports Medicine Center at Akron Children's Hospital. NCAA tournament madness all over the place, Joe, and unfortunately seeing some injuries. The Big Ten had their fair share, including our Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yeah, it is. It's one of my favorite times of the year, and I love March Madness. And I mean, starting with the kids and the high school kids playing is also a lot of fun, and the college tournament is one of the great sport events, and so it's just really fun to watch. It's really kind of interesting because injuries do definitely play a role. So as teams come down the stretch of playing 2 or 3 months of basketball, key injuries at the end of the year can really affect a team. But they can affect teams in different ways, and sometimes the timing of when these injuries occur, you only play 7, 8, 9 guys. Sometimes somebody can be out, somebody else steps in. There's been Cinderella stories of where guys have stepped in and led teams on long runs. So injuries don't always mean the end of the road for people, but you're right. A couple of the injuries that are out there, Villanova lost their point guard right in the last week, and he's going to be out and not be able to play. Colin Gillespie is his name. Michigan looks like they're going to lose one of their senior captains, Isaiah Livers. He has a stress fracture of the foot. We talk about that. It's a real common basketball injury, and of course, being at a sports medicine center for young people at our office, we see a lot of these stress fractures of the foot. And so they're really hard for people to understand. He's been playing several games with foot pain. People can actually do some running on a stress fracture. But these injuries are kind of, Ray, a hairline fracture. They're many times in the early stages, they don't even show up on the X-ray about 70% of the time. And the athlete just is having a micro fracture, is another word for it, in a bone, in the foot. They have more trouble bearing weight. And once we do further imaging, like an MRI, it becomes pretty straightforward if there is a stress fracture. They're calling it in this young man stress injury, stress fracture, but it sure doesn't sound good that he'll be playing for Michigan. He's kind of their defensive stalwart and captain of the team. But what happens is that if you do try to play through these, particularly depending on what bone it is, you can go on to a more significant fracture, a compound fracture, a fracture that needs fixed, a fracture that even has longer-term, implications to it. So it's risky to do that. So for many of these people, even though it seems like, oh my gosh, not a big deal in the foot to have these microfractures, we know better in Cleveland and in Ohio with some of these injuries having affected through the years historically some of our players. Stress fractures can be a big deal.
Dr. Joe Congini with us, Akron Children's Hospital Sports Medicine Center. And this is the time of year when, unfortunately, we see a lot of those stress fractures and such in the world of basketball, isn't it, Joe? We've seen so many through the years in the NCAA tournaments.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ray, and then you're right on. The deal is that as a long season goes on, this is an overload injury or overuse injury, and the constant load of the bones, the smaller bones in the foot, a lot of times the way people run, they have the mechanics of the way they run, loads one of the bones. The other part of it from our standpoint is certain bones are worse than others. If you remember the one that we struggled with, Zydrunas, with Z for a long time, that one does not heal very good. It's in the middle of the foot. There's one on the outside of the foot, the famous Jim Jones fracture that cost us perhaps an NBA championship. That's a fifth metatarsal on the outside of the foot. There's ones that are not as big a deal in the front of the foot called metatarsal fractures, but it depends on what bone gets overloaded. And in the length of a season, like you said, a long season, a lot of jumping and landing, and, oh, my foot in one area hurts. Sometimes it shows up on X-ray. It's very micro fracture type thing. But sometimes if they continue to have pain and they can't push off and we go to further imaging like an MRI, it becomes pretty straightforward that they have a fracture. And at this time of year, coaches have to shuffle the deck. They have to get new players out there. They have to look for new chemistry. They don't love to do that on the run right before a big tournament starting, but many teams do that, and there's even stories of teams who add a player who hasn't been playing all year, and they go on a run with it. So it's kind of interesting. It's part of the whole picture, and we're going to be seeing it all here as the week goes on for about a 3-week period. One of the most intriguing sports events of the year is March Madness and the NCAA tournament.
Joe, from a sports medicine area here, these kids, these 18 to 22-year-olds, are sometimes playing 3 days in a row, maybe 2 out of 3 days and such. Does that wear and tear after a strenuous season catch up with them? Like Ohio State last week, they played Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. How much strain is that on those smaller bones and such inside the foot?
Yeah, you're right, and you know the story, and you know the answer is a lot of coaches aren't sure if it's better sometimes to make a long, difficult run. I think 2 of those games for Ohio State were overtime games, too, and versus a team that maybe loses right away in the first game of the conference tournament. They're fresh. They have a whole week to get ready, and so it does vary, but by now they have been playing really daily, for a long period of time. And the period of time is if you're playing more than 5 or 6 days a week, you're at risk for some of these injuries. And one of the real common ones in basketball is stress fractures of the foot. So you're correct. That is one of the deals, is you don't really know. Did that give them momentum to be playing together as a team to play 4 games and 2 overtimes? Ohio State sure looked good last weekend, but that was a lot of games. Now they have a full week off to prepare this week, so it's a little bit of an unknown. But one thing that certainly is known is at the end of a long season is when some of these injuries occur. And I was going through the list last night, and there's about 5 or 6 teams that are going to have to be going into this tournament missing important players. I mentioned also the point guard at Villanova has an MCL, and there's other injuries that have occurred for other players. So it is a little bit of an attrition type situation where from the long season, what do we have left? Who's left standing? Who's okay? Who's not nicked up? And as we go into the tournament, you're right. Some of these cumulative injuries kind of rear their ugly head.
All right, Joe. Great information, my friend. Enjoy the tournament like I know you will, and we'll catch up with you next week.
All right, Ray. Take care. Have a great week.
You too. Dr. Joe Congini, Sports Medicine Center at Akron Children's Hospital, joining us live this morning.